Morning. Welcome to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Linda Phippen. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'll be assisting with the service today. It's nice to see all of you here in the sanctuary this morning. We're also glad to have those of you who are joining us on YouTube, whether today or at some time in the future. If you are visiting here today in person, we welcome you to join us after the service for coffee, snacks, and conversation. Here at Westside, not only are we friendly people, we strive to center our lives in love and acceptance that extends to those with differing spiritual beliefs or non-beliefs, different identities, and different ways of life. We believe that such love should be manifested in caring for each other and for the world around us, and in so doing, we build a thriving community for ourselves and everyone and every being around us. Announcements about upcoming events and other useful information may be found in your order of service or will have been scrolling on the screen if you are streaming on YouTube. They're also available on our website at westsideuuc.org and in our weekly newsletter. If you've not subscribed to our newsletter and would like to, you can use the QR code in our order of service, or you can subscribe on our website. I do actually have one other special announcement this morning. We have instituted a Memorial Garden Enhancement Fund. The board approved a fund called the Memorial Garden Enhancement Fund in memory of all Westside members and committed friends whose names are not otherwise displayed there. You can make contributions to this fund in honor of a Westsider who has passed and who is not already listed as interred in the Memorial Garden. And we will be creating markers to name those individuals. If you make a donation, please indicate whose memory you are honoring. For a check, the donor would make it out to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church and include a memo that says Memorial Garden Enhancement and the name of the individual they wish to honor. We would need the same information for any cash donation. And now I'll turn things over to Reverend Carol.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's good to see you all this morning. I'm Reverend Carol Bodeau, privileged to serve here as minister. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I will warn you right now in advance that I rewrote my sermon at 8 o'clock this morning, and I will explain why in a few minutes. So, we're going to be talking about anti-racism, but I took a step way further back. We're going to be talking about how that relates to community and recent tragedies in our neighborhood. So, as I invite the bowl to sound this morning, I invite you to ask yourself this question. How personally do I take the struggles of the world? How much do I let it in when things are happening that are just next door, or next door to that, or next door to that? Because at the root of any justice work is our willingness to take into our hearts and into our lives the very real impacts of other people's suffering. So let us, as the bowl sounds this morning, allow ourselves to consider that question. How far in am I willing to let it all come?
Reverend Carol will light the candles this morning and the chalice. In addition to the chalice, and we will light a community candle, both for the troubles of the world, whether faraway wars or the devastation of our neighbors in the mountains and neighboring states, and also to remember that there is beauty in the world, and to remember the acts of kindness and caring that people extend to each other in these times of trouble. The reading this morning comes from Mark Morrison Reed. It is titled, "The Task of the Religious Community." The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind us each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed.
So, I had a sermon, a really nicely tidy, polished, organized sermon all written for today. And I was very comfortable with it. And I'm really excited about us doing work on anti-racism. The purpose of anti-racism work is to bring our communities into greater balance, right? It's to heal historic harms and to create greater equity among people. It is the impulse to make sure that everyone has equal safety, equal well-being, equal resources. But that impulse this morning made me feel like I needed to do something other than what I had written this morning. We are doing the work of anti-racism, and what I'm going to say is very directly linked to it, and I'm going to explain how. We do have a commitment to that topic, but I cannot help but feel that in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, we need to talk about this current emergency. And I'm going to tell you how these things are related. So on Friday, as Helene was moving through the area, I will tell you that I was relieved. I was relieved first that we were pretty much safe, and second, that my version of Helene was a nice, steady, perfect, gentle rain for just the right amount of time to feed my crops on my farm exactly what we needed. My farm got needs met that would not have been met without that hurricane. I was pleased. We got about 7 inches of very much needed rain that came in exactly the right pace and exactly the right way. I was glad. Now, of course, I was aware that that wasn't what was happening for other people. Of course, I was like, oh, that's a shame, right? But you know, we all have a tendency to focus on our own reality. We have a tendency to pay the most attention right where we are. I got a message from my kids in Asheville saying, we're okay, the power's out, but we're okay. So I was like, they're okay, it's fine. And I went about my business. I watched some news reports, but still I was thinking, gosh, that's a shame. I'm sorry those people are experiencing that. But I didn't take it in. I didn't take it in. Then, on Saturday, as I was writing the perfectly crafted intellectual message about anti-racism, this other message came in. My son-in-law got a message out to his mom saying, we don't have any water, we don't have any electricity, we don't have any phone service. We're probably not going to have electricity for a week. In addition to the fact that their wedding is in 11 days. Maybe. So his mom relayed this message to me, and then I was like, okay, please hold. Something started to get inside. Next, my son Shannon got a message out to me saying they have a pet who might need emergency care, which they aren't sure they can get, and my worry is growing. And then I woke up this morning and my husband Tracy was watching video. We're now getting more footage coming out of these areas. Devastated towns, Newport underwater, Hartford, right? Dams being breached, images of completely flooded communities. And more, my own walls to taking this in were coming down. The dangers continue to be very real. We've got concerns about Douglas Dam closer to home, and now it feels personal, right? And then I ask myself, why does it have to be personal for me to let it get in? Why does it have to be personal, right? Why does it have to be so immediate for me to actually care this much? How is it that I'm able to act as if, well, that's how it goes, hope things work themselves out, when it's not close enough to me that I care? Do you see how this is connected to anti-racism? It's really easy to be like, well, gosh, that's a shame. Let's think about that. I think this is a very normal human response. I think we cannot possibly have the same level of crisis response to every single horrible thing that's happening in our world. But when we let it get close, or when it forces itself close, well, that's different. That's different. Compartmentalizing is central in so many of the ways we respond, and also I'm going to argue that it's central to the problems we are experiencing right now. It's causing problems. Compartmentalizing is something we do to survive, but then it makes things worse. We compartmentalize, I'm going to include me in this, we compartmentalize our excess resource use and think it's not the same as climate change. We compartmentalize our political views from the humanity of all the other people around us. We are able to compartmentalize people as this political party or that political party, rather than remembering that we're all one human family. We compartmentalize our daily lives, my comfortable daily life, from the daily lives and emergencies of those just in the next neighborhood, just in the next church, just in the next town, just over the state line. We compartmentalize to survive, but in so doing, it keeps us from letting it in. Now, we could not survive if we didn't do that to some extent. Mentally and emotionally, the panic that would ensue from truly letting all the way in all the things that are happening, including issues of race, that would be overwhelming. So I have been reminded over the last few days of another natural disaster that I experienced. I was in Northern California in 1989 during Loma Prieta, during the earthquake that devastated Northern California. Some of you remember that? Anybody remember that, Loma Prieta? You were in San Francisco, right? I was in the Central Valley, and my husband at the time was in San Francisco. I was a newly married grad student. We were at two different grad schools, and we were separated by all those bridges that collapsed. All the bridges that collapsed. And I will tell you that in the Central Valley, 120 miles away, when the earthquake hit, I was like, this can't possibly be a Bay Area earthquake. That's not, nah. I instinctively compartmentalized and tried to separate it from what it really was. I instinctively tried to minimize the magnitude of the problem. And then I was fine. My husband was fine. Lots of people were not fine, and we watched that play out for months and years afterwards. See, we as humans have this survival instinct to compartmentalize, to keep going, and to think, okay, we're just gonna, it's okay, it'll work itself out, right? Or I'll send some money, or I'll do something. But the challenge is actually letting it in. But nature actually knows that compartmentalization is a complete lie. This idea that we are interdependent, that we are all connected, if nothing else has been shown by this, the water of the last few weeks has demonstrated that. Helene did not care about state boundaries. The water that rained down from the hurricane didn't care about political divisions. It didn't care about state lines. It didn't care about any of those things. As a matter of fact, the water that breached the dams, the barriers, that flooding is kind of a stark reminder of the fact that nature remembers that we're all connected. There really is no separation. Nature takes seriously the interdependent web. And I will say that I know that and it is normal for us humans to not necessarily take it as seriously as we might. When we do get around to that sermon I had planned today, and we will, that's more detailed and more specific about specifically this book right here. When we get around to that, what we're going to be talking about is connection. How connected we are to those who aren't in this room. How connected we are to communities that are different from this one. How connected we are to people whose experience we frankly cannot possibly understand. And we are specifically going to talk about how we like to insulate ourselves from these things. This weekend has shown me how instinctive my response, it's my job to work on this stuff. It's my job to lead sermons about it. It's my job, right? And I insulate myself. I compartmentalize. I tell myself, I should pay attention to that. It is scary to even begin to think about all the suffering and the struggles and the pain and the injustice in this world, but we have to. The first thing we will have to do in any work for justice, in any anti-racist work, in any emergency response work, the first thing we have to do is let it in. I was having a conversation with Tracy this morning as I was sitting at the breakfast table rewriting my sermon and saying, oh my gosh, and he said, if you try to talk about it from your head, that will just create more division. You have to talk about it from your heart. Because the head is where the ego lives. The head is where we've got our rules and our decisions about who we are and what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's false and what's good and what's bad that are already pre-established. things we learned, things we decided, all right? How many of us in this room have had the experience of having a long-held assumption or belief changed by a direct experience with someone or something we care about? Yep. The head can mess up. Right? My parents taught me all kinds of things that they believe deeply, and I'm like, not so much. Right? We don't connect. We don't really connect, deeply connect through the intellect. The intellect is a wonderful tool, but it is a level of connection that is not nearly as deep as the heart. Heart connections will make us step out of our comfort zone. Heart connections will make me say, okay, Helen and I were plotting this morning. Whose car do we take? How much water do we put in it? Which road? We're like, okay, we're ready to get on the road. We're ready to take risks. Heart connections will allow us to have the courage and the willingness to do things that we would otherwise not be willing to do. Head connections make us do things that are comfortable. Heart connections make us do things that are risky and scary and vulnerable. And if that isn't at the core of anti-racism work, I don't know what is. Today, my family's imminent danger and needs forced me to wake up. So I rewrote the sermon, and I'm ad-libbing some here, because we are connected to those folks in Cock County and Greene County and Amblin County, to the folks in Unicoi and Jefferson County, to the people in Asheville and South Carolina and in Florida. We are connected to the people in Gaza. We are connected to the people who are experiencing war. We actually are connected. We are connected to people whose skin color makes it dangerous for them to drive in certain places. We are connected in all sorts of ways to people that we compartmentalize ourselves from. And we are connected to the species whose lives are threatened by the cheap foods we eat. And we are connected to the species whose lives are threatened because we want cool shoes. We are connected, but it's hard to let that in. It's hard to let that in. Do you know that we have actually, in our management of water on this planet, humans have actually tilted we have changed the tilt of our planet by the ways we're using water. That's crazy, people. What level of disconnect do we have to have? What level of compartmentalization do we have to engage in to allow that? So I had a much more soft, kind of like, yay, let's go do the work kind of sermon written. And then I woke up this morning and I thought, like, this is real. People are dying. Communities are devastated by natural disasters, by political things, by racial injustice, by economic injustice. And we're connected. So, I know that it's impossible to take all that in. I know that there's sometimes we can't do anything. I know that my instinct and my impulse to get in the car and go fix it is rooted in a certain kind of hubris that I have to check. I need to ask the people who need help what kind of help they need. This applies in every possible realm of justice work. It applies in this particular emergency, this natural disaster. Me wanting to make myself feel better by getting in my car and taking bottled water is not necessarily the best solution. Same thing applies with economic justice, with racial justice, with all kinds of things. So often from our comfortable seats, I live in a world of privilege. And I happen to, in this particular natural disaster, have been privileged to be on the easy side of the hurricane. I happen to live on the left side of the hurricane instead of the right side of the hurricane. Pure chance. Pure chance. Just happened to work out that way. But my impulse to go rushing in and take that privilege, like, oh, I'll make myself feel better, that's not the best response in the world. We really have to be mindful about this. And the first thing we have to do is let it in. Climate change and anti-racism and economic justice and all of it are all together. And they are all things that impact us, whether they're happening to me today or not. So I'd like you to take a moment and ask yourself this question. How are you like me this weekend? Yeah, it was funny. I said to Tracy, like, what do you think about all this? He said, I think humility is the biggest lesson. He said, nature will humble us. And many times our impulse to go and fix things and get it right does not come from a place of humility. I was humbled this weekend by my own compartmentalization and my self-awareness, my dawning self-awareness of how easy it was for me to be like, it'll be fine, I don't have to think about that. Oh, wait a minute, maybe I have to think about that. All right, so let's ask ourselves this question. How do we compartmentalize? And how can we help each other stop? We can't fix everything. But I think the growing edge for all of us is what we can take in. When we do this workbook, and I'm going to tell you in a minute the kinds of topics that we're going to be talking about with that. For those of you who choose to sign up for it, yes, but also for pretty much everybody in the congregation because it's going to be up here. When we start actually consciously and proactively addressing anti-racism work, the first thing we're going to have to do is get humble. The first thing we're going to have to do is put our egos down. The first thing we're going to have to do is not talk about all the things we already did. And how we already did that, and we already contributed to that, and we already fixed that. And we're going to have to put down our defensiveness about things like the word racism. We're going to have to put aside the ways we protect ourselves and be willing to be vulnerable and say, how have I been compartmentalizing? How have I been protecting myself? How have I been telling myself, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. So let's just take a moment. And I really want to invite you to take a moment. And I'm going to be quiet for a minute. And just invite you to ask yourself the question, how do I close off my heart, thinking that my mind can solve the problem? They have to work as a team. The mind and the heart have to work as a team. But how do I close off my heart to keep myself safe? And what are some ways I might let it open up? Just take a moment with that. So we're starting this anti-racism work on October 27th. And a number of you have signed up. If you want to sign up for this, you can sign. This is not a program you have to sign up and show up every time. You can show up when you can show up. If you show up for one discussion, that's great. If you show up for all of them, also great. We've got dates scheduled for the fall through the end of the year, but it's going to go on all year. We're going to start out, we're literally only going to cover like the first 20 pages of the workbook in the next few months. Because this isn't anything you can rush. This isn't stuff you can rush. There is no quick fix to injustice. We're going to start out with conversations about where we are with this. What are our core assumptions and biases that we're like, oh, I'm gonna do this, or I know nothing, or I know everything, or we're all going to be in a different place. People are going to have different experiences. We're going to start out with that on October 27th. In November, we're going to begin talking about words and how they trigger us. In my conversation this morning with Tracy, I read a couple of words out of my sermon, and he got triggered, and he didn't hear the rest of the words I had to say. And he was like, well, conservative listeners to that word would have been triggered. And I was like, okay, yep, words will trigger us. When we start talking about justice work, there are going to be words. We're going to talk about what words trigger us and what our assumptions are. We're going to talk about identity. We're going to talk about privilege. That's a triggering word for many of us. Privilege is a triggering word for many of us. We don't like to hear it. We definitely don't like to hear it about ourselves usually. We're going to talk about why it's hard to talk about race. We're going to talk about the most basic levels of vulnerability first. So, I would encourage us all to let what's happening right now in our world wake us all up. Not to what's happening out there first, yes, that, but what's happening in here. Because even the most awesome sermon on anti-racism wouldn't have done much in the world if I wasn't feeling it in my heart. If I'm not ready to go out there and take risks, if I'm not feeling it personally, it's really hard to do actions that are anything other than simple, safe actions. Now, I want to tell you about some changes we're making at Westside to make that true for the institution. So many of you are familiar with the ways that we have done share the plate in the past, right? People have heard the phrase share the plate. So the way that we have in the past financially supported other organizations in the area is that if somebody made an undesignated donation to Westside on a Sunday morning or some other time, a percentage of it went to some organization that we'd voted on to give money to for a few months. Is this sounding familiar to folks? People recognize this? So every quarter, we'd have an organization that we'd voted on and we were going to give them money. But we didn't actually have very much of a relationship with most of those organizations. We were mostly doing it from our heads, not our hearts. We weren't taking the risk of being vulnerable and being in relationship with our neighbors to the degree that we could. So we've been thinking about changing that. One of the biggest problems with that, it's just purely convenience and ease for us, is that for the bookkeepers, that's a nightmare. It was easy when it was cash and checks, but now that we have online giving, it's impossible to tell whether someone intended their online donation to go someplace specific a lot of times. So it's become kind of a bookkeeping nightmare. But more than that, we've realized that just sending money to an institution we voted on and then sent them a check is not relational. It is not heart-centered. It is not a deep enough commitment. So, instead, we aren't going to use the share the plate phrase anymore. We're going to talk about justice and generosity, which are much more personal and much more heartfelt. And we now have partners rather than recipients. Do you see how different that is? Do you see how different it is to make a partnership where we listen and we are in collaboration with people's needs? So there are some organizations that we've been in partnership with for a long time that we're going to continue to be in partnership with. Family Promise is one of those organizations. Samantha Monday's program for people coming out of the local prison system, the jail system, into recovery is another program. But the board has decided that we're going to be more consistent and more long-term in how we relate to organizations in the community. So, here's what we're looking at. Right now, today is the last day that donations will go to the Unitarian Universalist Association. But the first thing we did is we have decided that we're going to make that something that's just in our budget. Rather than just randomly seeing how much we can send to our denomination, we're going to commit to sending a certain amount to the denomination every year to show that we are a committed partner and a committed participant in our denomination. And that's a partnership. And here are the 4 themes that we want to commit to working on as a community going forward. In the fall, focusing on the family. So in a couple weeks, Morgan Ringelspaugh is going to be doing a service about an organization called Awesome Found, which we're going to be working with right now as our family organization. We will continue to be supporting a family promise. So at Christmas time, we will be supporting families through Family Promise, but the fall will always be focused on the family. In the winter, we will continue to work on our anti-racism support of the bottom. The bottom is our anti-racism community partner, and we will continue to build a relationship with them for a long time until it becomes clear for them and for us that that's no longer necessary or viable or in their best interest. But for this foreseeable future, they will be our partner that we will be focused on in the winter. In the spring, we will always focus on LGBTQIA+ issues, and Knox Pride is our partner in that area for the foreseeable future. And in the summer, we'll be focusing on an environmental group, which the Green Sanctuary team will be choosing for us. So what's going to happen is this. The board is committing to a certain amount of money to those organizations every quarter, regardless of how much comes in from the congregation. Do you see how that's a commitment that's different? That's a whole different level of commitment. Any amount that comes in above our commitment, our committed donation to that organization, will be added to it. But we've decided that we have to kind of show up a little bit more consistently, a little bit more commitment, and a little bit more fully. So we're going to be doing this differently. Jim, can I ask you to do me a favor and hold up that slightly orangish color box? I'm sorry for, right next to you there. Some of you, sorry for those of you virtually, you cannot see it. We have a new box in the room. There's a QR code that goes with it. Now, if you want to donate to a Justice and Generosity partner, you can put a designated donation in that box. It's next to the regular box. But if we're talking about Awesome Found, or we're talking about Knox Pride, or that box is specifically all going to go to that organization, okay? Right now, if you want to support the people who are struggling in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, I would encourage you to make donations to the Red Cross. They are specifically asking for donations to the Red Cross. That's probably the easiest way right now. And we will be continuing to give you more information about how we can support those communities going forward. It's really easy to forget about it, right? It'll be really easy to forget about that in 2 weeks, but we're going to try to remember and be conscious. So I know that that was not necessarily the service some of you were expecting this morning. And it wasn't necessarily as focused on this book as you thought it would be. But it seems to me that this deeper issue of showing up with our hearts, of letting it in, of recognizing that we are in fact connected, even when we tell ourselves we're not, we can't do anti-racism work without that. That's foundational. That's absolutely foundational. We need that. So what we're going to do to close today is we're going to sing a song written by activist Holly Neer. The words are going to be on our wonderful new video screen with our wonderful new video projector. And the words are about being willing, being open and willing. Sometimes being hopeless and scared and overwhelmed makes us shut down. But the words to the chorus of this, I am open and I am willing. To be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. Lift me up in the light of change. So that's the spirit. We were going to sing that anyway. That's the spirit that I'm inviting us to take into our hearts today. An openness and a willingness to be changed. Sometimes when we get engaged in justice work, I am totally taking this as me too. Sometimes we want to change stuff outside of ourselves. Think about that for a minute. Oh, we want the world to be more just. We're going to change that stuff over there. That's not actually how it works. How it actually works is we're changed inside first. We change. When we change, then things change. So what's going to happen, I'm going to invite the choir to come up and help lead this song. We are going to sing that chorus once through, and then you all are going to join us in singing it, and then the melody is literally the same for every chorus and every verse. Once you've heard it once, you've heard the whole song. So we're going to sing the chorus once through, and then we're going to invite you all to sing with us, and the words will be scrolling up there. For those of you who are with us virtually, Curtis, who is my personal hero virtually, Curtis has posted the lyrics for all of you so that you can sing along with us. So choir, if you would come up. Okay, so we're going to make it personal. I invite you to rise and join hands if you are so willing. If you are not, hold your own hand. It is totally okay. Hold hands. You know, I think sometimes when we don't want to do this, I mean, I know this is not comfortable for everybody, and that is totally okay. There are times, there you go, change the circle to me. Judy, come over here. Here. Grab my elbow. Okay. There are times when we actually need our own space. When it's too much, when being connected is too much, and we need to take a break. That is completely okay. There are times when we can't do it, and we got to take a rest. That is completely okay. And then the whole point is come back. Come back into community. Come back into the circle. Come back into connection. Bring yourself renewed. Bring your heart. Bring yourself. When we want to do justice work in the world, we can only do it if we're willing to show up. Open hearts, open minds, willing hands. So as you go out into this day and into this week and into this really hurting world, know that just caring, it's huge. Action will arise from that. So go in peace with open hearts as well as open minds. May it be so.